My child, do not scroll away from this moment. Something has been moving behind the silence, something you were never meant to discover through fear, gossip, or confusion, but through clarity. Stay here, because what is unfolding around your connection is not as simple as it appears. There is a reason your heart has felt strangely alert lately. There is a reason certain memories have been returning without warning, why old questions have suddenly begun to feel unfinished, and why the energy surrounding the person you love seems different. What you are about to hear is a fictional spiritual story, yet within its emotion is a message about truth, courage, and the moment when secrets become too heavy to carry. Someone who believed they could remain safely hidden behind confusion is beginning to panic, because your soulmate has finally reached a point they never thought they would reach. They are ready to speak. For a long time, your soulmate remained caught between what they knew and what they were willing to admit. They told themselves that silence was protecting everyone. They convinced themselves that certain truths belonged in the past, that opening old doors would only create more pain, and that perhaps time would bury what nobody had the courage to confront. But time did not bury it. Silence did not erase it. In fact, every day they refused to speak, the truth seemed to grow heavier. It followed them into quiet rooms. It appeared in dreams. It returned when they heard your name. It surfaced whenever someone mentioned loyalty, honesty, forgiveness, or the consequences of a choice that can never be taken back. And now something has changed inside them so deeply that pretending has become harder than confessing. The third party can feel that change. They may not know exactly what your soulmate intends to reveal, but they know something is different. The distance is different. The conversations are different. The way your soulmate looks at them is different. There is no longer the same hesitation in your soulmate's eyes. There is no longer that silent agreement to avoid certain subjects. Something has shifted from fear into resolve, and the person who benefited most from the silence can feel the walls beginning to close around the story they worked so hard to control. That is why the panic has started. Not because heaven is promising revenge. Not because something terrible must happen. But because when a hidden truth moves toward the light, anyone who depended upon darkness suddenly loses the power they once possessed. My child, this story did not begin yesterday. Yesterday was only the moment the pressure became impossible to ignore. The real beginning happened long before you realized anything was wrong. There was a choice, then another choice, then one more decision made in fear. One person attempted to protect an image. Another tried to avoid confrontation. Someone believed they could manipulate the meaning of what happened. Your soulmate knew pieces of the truth, but not all of it at once. That is important. They were not standing above everything with perfect knowledge. They were inside the confusion too. They questioned themselves. They wondered whether they had misunderstood what they saw, whether they had been unfair, whether speaking would destroy relationships that could never be repaired. But there was one detail they could never forget. A sentence. A moment. A reaction that made no sense at the time. Your soulmate has replayed it more times than they would ever admit. Sometimes in anger. Sometimes in sadness. Sometimes late at night when everything became quiet enough for the memory to return without distraction. Every time they revisited that moment, another piece seemed to fall into place. And recently, something happened that caused the entire picture to look different. Someone said too much. Someone contradicted an old story. Something your soulmate had been told years ago suddenly no longer matched what they now understood. That was the beginning of yesterday's turning point. The third party noticed your soulmate becoming quiet. Do not mistake that quietness for weakness. This time, the silence was not fear. It was observation. Your soulmate began paying attention to details they once ignored. They remembered dates. They compared conversations. They thought about who knew what and when they knew it. And then they realized something that changed the emotional meaning of everything. The third party had not merely been standing outside the story watching events unfold. They had been influencing it. Perhaps through pressure. Perhaps through a lie. Perhaps through jealousy, selfishness, emotional manipulation, or a desperate attempt to protect themselves. Whatever the exact fictional event behind this story, your soulmate has come to believe that this person played a role in the ending of something deeply important to you. And that is where the word death enters this message. Not necessarily the death of a person, my child. Listen carefully. Sometimes something dies long before a person understands what was lost. Trust can die. A friendship can die. A dream can die. A relationship can be pushed toward an ending because someone interfered with what two hearts were still trying to understand. A future can disappear because of one lie delivered at the exact moment two people were most vulnerable. Hope can be buried beneath misinformation. Confidence can collapse after repeated emotional pressure. Something you once believed might survive can be taken apart piece by piece until you stand years later asking yourself, how did everything change so quickly? Your soulmate has begun asking that same question. And the answer keeps leading them back to the same person. That is why they are preparing to reveal the secret. There is something incredibly emotional about the moment a person realizes that what they once considered coincidence may have actually been influence. Your soulmate used to think the timing was strange. Now they believe it was intentional. They used to wonder why you suddenly became distant, why communication changed, why certain misunderstandings appeared one after another. They once assumed everything simply fell apart naturally. But recently they discovered that somebody may have been feeding both sides different versions of the same story. Imagine the weight of that realization. Imagine discovering that a misunderstanding you mourned may not have happened by accident. Imagine learning that one conversation was repeated differently to another person. Imagine finding out that your silence had been interpreted as rejection when it was actually confusion. Imagine learning that your soulmate's hesitation had been described to you as indifference, while your own pain had been described to them as proof that you wanted nothing more to do with them. That is the kind of secret that changes how someone remembers the past. Your soulmate is not just preparing to expose another person's actions. They are preparing to confront their own guilt for believing the wrong story. And that guilt is breaking something open inside them. Yesterday, they reached the point where they could no longer defend the silence. They may have been alone when it happened. They may have been looking through old messages, remembering a conversation, hearing something from someone else, or simply sitting with a truth they had avoided for too long. Suddenly the excuses no longer worked. The familiar thought, "Maybe it is better to leave this alone," did not bring peace. Instead, another thought appeared: what if staying silent makes me part of the damage? That question changed everything. Because your soulmate has carried regret around you for longer than you realize. There are things they wish they had asked you directly. There are moments when they wish they had trusted their own heart instead of outside voices. There were times they nearly contacted you, nearly explained themselves, nearly admitted that something about the story never felt complete. But each time, fear interrupted. Pride interrupted. Timing interrupted. Other people interrupted. Life kept moving, yet the unfinished truth remained exactly where it had always been. Now they no longer want to carry it into another chapter. The third party knows this. Maybe your soulmate said something simple like, "I need to tell the truth." Perhaps they said, "I cannot protect this anymore." Perhaps there was no dramatic declaration at all. Sometimes panic begins because of the smallest sentence. A calm sentence. A sentence spoken by someone who has finally made a decision. The third party may have laughed at first. They may have tried to minimize it. They may have reminded your soulmate of consequences, old promises, family opinions, friendships, reputations, or everything that could become uncomfortable if the truth was spoken. But the old methods are no longer working. Your soulmate has reached the stage where discomfort feels easier than dishonesty. That realization terrifies the person who depended upon their silence. There is another layer, my child, and this is where the story becomes even more personal. The secret is not only about what happened. It is about why it happened. Your soulmate has recently begun to understand that the third party's actions were not random. There was motivation behind them. There was something they wanted to protect, gain, prevent, or control. Perhaps they were afraid of losing influence over your soulmate. Perhaps they saw your connection growing stronger and felt threatened by the possibility that they would no longer have the same emotional power. Perhaps your presence exposed something about them that they did not want your soulmate to notice. Or perhaps they believed they knew what was best for everyone and crossed a line that was never theirs to cross. For years, they may have justified it. They might have told themselves, "I was helping. I was protecting them. They were better apart. It would never have worked. I only told them what I believed." But there is a difference between giving an opinion and secretly shaping someone else's reality. Your soulmate now understands that difference. And once a person understands that, they cannot unknow it. That is why the panic has intensified. Something else happened yesterday. Something the third party did not expect. Your soulmate defended you. Not publicly. Not dramatically. Perhaps nobody applauded. Perhaps you did not hear it. But when your name came into the conversation, your soulmate no longer allowed the old version of you to be repeated without challenge. They said something that made the room emotionally colder. They questioned a detail. They corrected a claim. They refuse to participate in the old narrative. And the third party immediately understood what that meant. Your soulmate no longer believes them completely. That is the beginning of the end of their control over the story. My child, you may wonder why this matters so deeply. You may think, if the past is already gone, why reopen it? Because there is a difference between living with an ending and living with a false explanation for that ending. A person can move forward from pain, but confusion leaves invisible doors open. When you do not understand why something happened, part of you keeps returning to it. Not because you want suffering, but because the mind wants coherence. The heart wants truth. Your soulmate has lived with that same unresolved tension. They remember your eyes. They remember a moment when you looked as if you wanted to say something. They remember the way you pulled back. They remember telling themselves that your silence meant you had stopped caring. Now they are beginning to wonder whether you were protecting yourself from something they never understood. That possibility has hit them harder than they expected. Because if they were wrong about your silence, what else were they wrong about? If they misunderstood that moment, how many other memories have been built upon a false assumption? If the third party influenced one important conversation, what other conversations were changed? Those questions have become impossible to silence. And this is where your soulmate's emotional struggle becomes deeper than anger. They are grieving lost time. That may be the true death hidden inside this story. The death of a version of your connection that could have existed. The death of trust at a moment when trust was still reparable. The death of a shared possibility that neither of you understood was being quietly weakened. Your soulmate is beginning to realize that someone may have helped destroy something they still secretly valued. And now they want you to know. But there is a problem. They do not know how you will react. This is the part they fear most. Not the third party. Not the consequences. You. Because your soulmate understands that truth arriving late can be complicated. They know you may ask why they did not speak sooner. They know you may wonder why they trusted someone else's version instead of asking you directly. They know revealing the secret does not automatically erase the hurt. They know that saying, "I finally understand," cannot return the time that passed. That is why they have hesitated even after deciding to speak. They want to explain without sounding like they are making excuses. They want to take responsibility without carrying responsibility for things they did not know. They want to tell you what the third party did, but they also know that somewhere in the story they made choices too. This makes their confession more powerful. Because they are no longer planning to come to you as a hero who discovered someone else's wrongdoing. They are preparing to come to you as a human being who realizes they should have trusted their heart sooner. And that humility is new. Your soulmate once wanted to be right. Now they want to be truthful. Those are not the same thing. There is something else heaven wants the fictional listener of this story to understand. Truth does not always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it arrives as a person finally saying, "I was wrong." Sometimes the most extraordinary spiritual turning point is not a miracle in the sky, but an honest conversation two people thought would never happen. Your soulmate is approaching that conversation. But the third party is trying to prevent it. They have begun applying pressure. Not necessarily through anything dramatic. They may be using guilt. They may be reminding your soulmate of old loyalty. They may be saying, "Why bring this up now?" They may warn that speaking will only reopen wounds. They may accuse your soulmate of creating unnecessary chaos. They may even try to convince them that you would never believe the truth anyway. That final argument almost worked. Almost. For one moment, your soulmate questioned everything again. What if they do not believe me? What if it is too late? What if telling the truth only makes them hate me? Then something unexpected happened. Your soulmate remembered something you once said. Perhaps it was years ago. Perhaps you said it casually. Perhaps you do not even remember saying it. But they remembered. And the meaning of those words changed. It was something about truth. Something about honesty. Something about wanting to hear something directly rather than through other people. And suddenly your soulmate realized that withholding the truth because you might not like it would only repeat the same mistake that caused so much damage in the first place. They decided you deserve the right to know. That is when the third party's panic became real. Because your soulmate stopped asking for permission. They stopped negotiating. They stopped discussing whether the truth should come out. Their mind moved from, "Should I tell them?" to, "How do I tell them?" That tiny shift is enormous. And someone else felt it immediately. My child, the person who has carried this hidden responsibility is now facing something they never planned for, the possibility that both of you may finally compare stories. That is what they fear most. Not accusation. Comparison. Because separate stories can be controlled. Connected stories expose contradictions. When two people who have been told different things finally sit together and ask, "What were you told?" the truth often appears in the space between those answers. Your soulmate knows this now. And there is one particular detail they are desperate to compare with you. A date. A message. A statement. Something you supposedly said. Your soulmate has carried those words for a long time believing they came from you. But yesterday, they discovered a reason to doubt it. This changed the entire emotional direction of the story. Because if you never said those words, then someone else made your soulmate believe you did. And if that happened, the ending you both accepted as inevitable may have been built upon something false. Pause with that for a moment. That is why your soulmate's emotions are spiraling between anger, regret, hope, and fear. Hope is the emotion they are trying hardest to hide. Because if the story was manipulated, then perhaps your connection was never as one-sided as they believed. Perhaps you did care. Perhaps you were waiting. Perhaps you were confused too. Perhaps both of you were standing on opposite sides of the same misunderstanding while someone in the middle quietly benefited from your separation. That possibility has awakened something your soulmate thought was gone. Not certainty. Not fantasy. Possibility. And possibility can be powerful after a long season of resignation. The third party has noticed this too. Your soulmate has started speaking your name differently. There is less defensiveness. Less bitterness. more curiosity, more tenderness than they intended to reveal. That change says everything. Because anger can sometimes be manipulated. Confusion can be manipulated. But once someone begins asking honest questions, control becomes much harder. Your soulmate is asking questions now. And there is one question they have not yet dared to ask the third party directly. They are waiting. They want to know whether the person will confess voluntarily. So far, they have not. Instead, they have avoided the subject. Changed details. Acted offended. Pretended not to remember. And every attempt to escape the conversation has made your soulmate more certain that something serious is being hidden. This is where part 1 must leave you, my child, because the next detail changes everything. Your soulmate did something late yesterday that the third party does not yet know about. They went looking for proof. Not revenge. Proof. They searched for something connected to the moment everything changed between you. Something old. Something almost forgotten. They did not know whether it still existed. They expected to find nothing. But they found something. And when they saw it, they froze. Because what they discovered did not merely challenge the third-party story. It suggested that the secret was much bigger than your soulmate ever imagined. There was another person involved. Someone who knew what happened. Someone who had remained silent all this time. And hidden inside what your soulmate found was one detail connected directly to you, a detail that could finally reveal what truly died that day, who helped destroy it, and why the third party has suddenly become terrified that your soulmate is about to tell you everything.